Welcome to Mintel's Little Conversation podcast.
Hello and welcome to Mintel's Little Conversation, where our experts bring you fresh ideas and new perspectives on how consumers eat, drink, shop, groom and think. My name is Sam Dover. I'm a Category Director for Beauty and Personal Care here at Mintel. And today I'm joined by my colleagues Nick and Katie to talk about direct-to-consumer retailing. So direct-to-consumer has become somewhat of a buzz term in recent years as more brands are essentially cutting out the middleman. So with that in mind, today we're going to be exploring what that means for retail and discuss the future outlook for direct-to-consumer businesses. We'll be using the term direct-to-consumer and DTC interchangeably throughout. So just for a bit of clarity, before we get started, D2C essentially just means direct to consumer. So to get us started, can I ask you both to very briefly introduce yourselves?
Yeah, hi, my name's Katie Hansen. I am a retail and e-commerce analyst here in the US. And super excited today to talk about the DTC market.
Hi, and I'm Nick Carroll. I'm the Category Director for Retail Insights here in Mintel, Europe, and I am equally excited to be here and to talk about direct-to-consumer.
Perfect, thank you. So before we really delve into the conversation, I think it makes sense for our listeners to simply outline what we mean when we say direct-to-consumer. So can one or both of you please just very briefly give us our Mintel definition, so to speak?
Yes, well, I'll give it my best go because there's many grey areas within this. But speaking very simply, a direct-to-consumer model is a strategy where brands sell their products directly to their consumers instead of going through a retailer. Now, there's many examples of sort of those brands that are popular presently, people like Allbirds, Peloton, HelloFresh, Glossier, Beauty Pie, multiple across both the UK, the US and globally. But the reality is direct-to-consumer is not necessarily anything new. People like Avon have been doing this now for, now hundreds of years, selling their products directly to consumers without retailers. But what's changed and why there's so much industry buzz at the moment is that the rise of e-commerce, the rise of social platforms has broken down barriers for brands that want to sell directly to reach a much broader audience. The purpose of retailers was always to allow brands to get their products in front of as many people as possible. The rise of online has meant that those barriers have come down, and now brands can reach that broad audience globally if they wish through minimal effort.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense, Nick. And I'm aligned with you there. I think what you say about e-commerce is really key for the direct-to-consumer market. That's where a lot of brands are being born, more or less. So instead of looking to be in retail, they're looking to grow solely from their online channels.
Perfect. I feel like when we see a lot of brands that have been around for a very long time kind of embracing direct to consumer. So in my head, I'm thinking the likes of Nike. Do we include them? Is that part of, would they be considered direct to consumer business?
Well, I think that's the tricky part is that, the line between, a DTC brand and traditional brand really are blurring. And it's just kind of where the market is heading because brands are looking to take advantage of all that the direct-to-consumer model has to offer to consumers, which I know we'll explore more later on. But yeah, it's definitely becoming more blurry.
Amazing. So just for a little bit of extra context, how established is the direct-to-consumer market? So how many consumers are buying in this way?
Yeah, no, it's a quite established model and consumers are definitely participating. In the US, 40% of consumers have purchased from a DTC brand in the last 12 months. And another 38% said, while they haven't, they would be interested in doing so. So there's quite a bit of interest and active participation happening. And as we mentioned, the line between DTC and traditional brand is really blurry at best. And consumers don't really think, oh, I'm purchasing DTC or I'm not. It's really about, the experience of the brand. And we're also seeing that 67% of consumers feel that, whether or not a brand is DTC doesn't really impact whether or not they shop with the brand. So again, it's all about the experience that consumers are seeking and what a brand can offer them.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I feel like we've seen an awful lot of hype around direct to consumer. So from your perspectives, what do you think are the benefits of this model, and why are we seeing so much hype around it?
I think, as Katie already said, the blurred lines between the two probably means that the reality is when we see hype around direct-to-consumer brands, it's just because a new brand has had a very good idea and there's a lot of a hype around it. They may choose the model direct-to-consumer because the modern landscape allows them to do that. But I think there is some significant interest within it from the disruptive element of many brands quickly becoming sizable without having that retail relationship that in the past would have necessarily been needed to allow them to generate the sales that they have. So I think that sort of freedom or that sort of democratized access to consumers is where there is a lot of buzz in those areas and what that means longer term. But I think the reality is a good idea is a good idea. So it doesn't need to be D2C to be, exciting or have buzz around it. But I think the model more broadly is sort of hinting towards a future where there is more equal access given to brands via the internet to consumers.
I think the other piece of that too for brands is that they can control the experience that the consumer receives. So, they can develop a website that is a streamlined experience. It's easy for consumers to shop, and consumers can also have, a more direct connection with the brand and get the assistance that they need while they're shopping. So rather than brands having to rely on a retailer or middleman to bring that experience to consumers, they can be more hands-on in that experience the shopper receives.
So from my understanding of D2C, I feel like there is a lot of brands out there. I feel like it's quite a fragmented market. And so with that in mind, I'm really intrigued to know how and where consumers discover these brands. Where do they learn about them?
So if we split the market in two, we've obviously got the more traditional brands that are moving into D2C, and consumers are aware of them, and that awareness is why they're interested in selling directly to consumers and driving some more margin on those areas. But in terms of the startup D2C sector, a good portion of the sort of marketing drive that grows awareness for those brands, at least in the UK and Europe, comes through social media. So the sort of greater use of social media that we've seen over the past decade, and in particular, how those social platforms have pivoted themselves towards more advertising-based revenue, has sort of in tandem given growth to this emergence of D2C brands in that sector. So within our data, a quarter of consumers that are aware of D2C brands have found out about them through adverts on social media. A further 20% have found out through social media influencers. So it's a really core channel, particularly for those smaller brands who may not necessarily have the sort of marketing budget that other larger brands do, to really find a very specific audience, market directly to them, and build that and foster that community of loyal brand followers in the early stages of their development.
Yeah, social media is also really key in the US. 40% of consumers who've heard of the direct-to-consumer brand have discovered them through a social media ad. Interestingly, this year, social media outranked TV commercials as to where consumers were discovering brands. So social is key, but I also think it goes to show that, a wide diverse range of media is also needed, because consumers are everywhere. So brands also need to be everywhere consumers are in order to grab their attention.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, because although social media is really important in terms of finding an initial audience, what a lot of brands can struggle for is continuing or creating that loyalty in that audience longer term. And that's where the more diverse marketing mix comes into play. And if you look at sort of those D2C brands that have moved into, say, television advertising, Peloton, infamously maybe doing so in the past, what that has done is bring them to a much broader demographic audience than just promoting through social channels does. So in the UK, we see that, those that are buying into D2C, they are much younger and much more affluent generally, but then actually those brands that are marketing or advertising on television or more traditional mediums, they've got the more broader audience, they've got the bigger audience, and they've moved past what we would say that sort of startup D2C area into more mainstream and traditionally competitive brands.
Yeah, that makes sense. As businesses grow, it's going to be important to meet the consumer where they are, so to speak, from an advertising perspective. So when we think about how brands reach these consumers and how they engage with them, but also as we think about, what is stopping consumers from engaging with direct-to-consumer brands. So I want to move the conversation on now and think about the deterrent, so the barriers to entry. So what factors do you think stop consumers from engaging with these kind of businesses?
One of the biggest barriers we're seeing is that consumers just haven't found a need for the products that are offered. And when we think about some of the products that, DTC brands provide, a lot of them aren't those repeat purchases, or, they're not something that consumers are going to buy every few months. If we think about, for example, shoes, there's some really great shoe brands, from a direct to consumer perspective, but I don't need shoes every few months. It might be maybe a once a year purchase or something like that. So with so many options out there, consumers just need a reason to buy from a DTC brand specifically.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And I think is some of the sort of hesitancy from consumers to buy into a DTC brand also comes through those sort of channels that many startups are using, being social media. So, I think around 40% of consumers in the UK say it's hard to trust new brands that they find on social media. Now that's, whether you're D2C, whether you're whatever model you're taking, that's, a barrier that people have to move past. But I think through that channel, and particularly as we are inundated with information and new brands, new services through online channels, it does become harder for consumers to sort of weed out what's actually a good brand, a good product or good service to invest in. And that's actually going back to our earlier discussion around, how do brand people find out about them? We can't forget that word of mouth and sort of creating that sort of, to use a term, market maven element of invested, early adopters in your brand to promote the benefits is really important. Around 25, 26% of consumers in the UK said they found out about a DTC brand because a friend or family told them to use them. So that's really important, and that's really important for those younger brands to sort of mobilize those early adopters into people that can move forward and spread the word about their brand.
Yeah, no, Nick, that's a great point about word of mouth. Because I think consumers also simply forget too. There's so many options and so many brands to choose from that they don't always think about, going to a DTC brand specifically unless they've had a really good previous experience with them.
So on that note, I feel like that links quite nicely. What impact do we think store presence or lack of has? Does that impact whether or not consumers shop with these businesses?
Well, I think, many of them come to the market as what we would call in Europe an online only or pure play perspective. They don't have a physical presence. But what we are seeing more and more of is as brands mature, they're actually moving into physical locations. So in the UK, we've got brands like Gymshark and Castor, who are, D2C brands. They have both opened their first physical stores in the past year. People like Peloton are taking on more physical space. And I think what that does is, it takes away the idea that this is a new brand, because to have a physical space, you have to be established and it's, official, as it were, to use a bad term. But if you're next to Nike, that gives your brand some legitimacy rather than next to 100 other brands in social media. So I think that physical space is really important. It's not integral. We've also seen many D2C brands thrive in the online only space, but it is an important element of trust in your brand.
That's so interesting about that legitimacy. I feel like that's something that we've seen in beauty with the likes of Glossier, the Inky List, kind of all experimenting and or rolling out even permanent stores now. So that's definitely interesting.
Yeah, no, physical stores have become quite important and more prevalent too in the US. You know, Warby Parker, Casper, Allbirds, they all have their own store. And you can also start to find some of these brands in more traditional retailers like Target. So again, kind of going back to, you know, those blurring lines of what a DTC brand is. But being in a store, you know, first, having their own store brings the brand to life for shoppers. You know, they get to experience the product and the brand in its own, you know, branded experience place. But also, you know, being in places such as Target and Walmart, consumers can discover these brands as they're shopping, you know, through their everyday shopping journey as well. So instead of relying just on, you know, them seeing a social media ad, now they can browse the aisles at their own leisure and, you know, interact with that product to inspect it and the quality of it before they make a purchase, which increases their confidence in doing so.
So I feel like I now want to think about where we are currently in terms of direct to consumer. And I'm really interested to hear from you two, because you've been doing a lot of research on this topic at the minute. What examples or what brands would you call out as being so-called best in class? Which brands do you think are being the most disruptive, doing something particularly interesting?
That's a good one. I'm going to get in first, just in case you steal mine, Katie. But no, I think that there's a host of examples within that. I think I'm going to take one from the more established sector, and I'm going to take one from the startup-y sector, shall we say. But I think from the more established sector, I really enjoyed what Levi's has done in terms of its move more into D2C. Obviously, it's still a brand, it still supplies to stores. But what it has done over the past sort of 10 years, particularly in, I think it's the same in the US, but in the UK and Europe, has looked to open more of its own physical space to give itself a more direct connection to consumers. And it's done that in a way that adds additional elements to that interaction. So in store, they will have customization stations. They will do alterations. They will give consumers a reason to visit them rather than visiting a retailer. And it brings to life in that area. Core to that has also been the sort of rollout of the loyalty scheme and actually creating a real environment and community around those areas. I think in the sort of more startup space, I've really liked what brands like Grind, which is a smaller startup based in London, who operate a cafe in Shoreditch, but they also do biodegradable and compostable, essentially Nespresso pods. And they have built that up. They have very interesting and great branding, but they do that through subscription. So they are solving a problem in terms of the plastic waste elements of more established brands in that sector, but they are doing so with a really interesting and community-focused way. So those would be my two picks, but I've got another 10 on my tongue. So.
There's been quite a few entrants in the beauty and personal care space that have really focused on bringing that customized experience to their consumers. For example, Pro's Hair Care comes to mind. You know, they are offering a quiz for shoppers to, you know, take that understands their, you know, environment as well as their own personal, you know, hair care desires, and then providing a custom formula for them to meet those needs. And again, that's also built on a subscription service. So consumers don't have to think, oh, I need to reorder because I'm running low. You know, that need is just automatically taken care of. And it's another thing they can cross off their to-do list. But we've also seen some really interesting, more up-and-coming entrants in spaces such as like early childhood development and even pet food. You know, now we're getting into brands offering customized dog food, you know, for dog owners who want to provide the absolute best for their furry friend without having, you know, just to break their budget. So I think that's a really interesting space to talk about. You know, DTC is really focusing on that personalized, customized offering that they can give to their consumers.
Yeah, I think that personalization element is going to be a big driver over the next decade. I think, one of the other ones, if I'm going to cheat and choose three that I really like, is a brand called Nourished in the UK, which is a vitamin or a supplements brand, but they create custom supplements that are based to you. So based on your needs. So they will, and they look great as well. They look like little cakes, but they've done that in a really interesting way. So they, the product looked appetizing, but it's completely personalized to you and is giving you the benefits in those areas. So I do think that's where D2C can play really strongly over the next decade, is focusing on the personal rather than sort of the mass market that traditional brands have played in.
I think that's so interesting. I feel like I've been, rightly or wrongly, a little bit skeptical of personalization, the kind of idea of something, whether or not people actually need personalization, but I think it's interesting to see where it's heading. And I think direct to consumer is an interesting space to watch from a personalization perspective, because I think we're starting to see more functionality come through in personalization. It's not just a nice to have, it's part of, really, as you say, kind of elevating the user experience, so to speak. So that's definitely interesting and leads me quite nicely onto my next question, which is, as we look forward, we've kind of touched on it there, personalization being a key kind of driver in why consumers would shop in this way. But what are the other factors? Why else would consumers buy into direct-to-consumer brands?
Yeah, I think price is a key factor for DTC brands. And, a DTC brand might not necessarily be the lowest price, but you are getting a substantially better price for a more luxury product. So you're kind of getting that luxury feel without the associated costs. So, that personalized experience, a product that is tailored to you, a shopping experience that's tailored to you. There's more added value services that, compile into the price that you're paying for the product.
Yeah, price is really important. There was an interesting stat that came out of the UK research where it was 2/3 of UK consumers said that brands should offer lower prices when purchasing directly from them than from retailers. And that shows the sort of trade-offs that consumers think they may get if they come straight to you rather than through a retailer. But for multiple different reasons, that's often not the case. Those prices are matched to retailers either to retain relationships or because smaller brands don't have the scale of those bigger brands. So actually, to Katie's point, if you're going direct to consumer, you need to be giving lots of different elements within that. You either need to give that sort of luxury feel or that more personalized take. You need to be offering something unique in the market, because if consumers are coming to you expecting the lowest prices and they don't get that, then that's, a potentially negative. And it's the same with delivery as well. Amazon has changed everyone's mindset and what is possible in terms of delivery. Next day is, expected now for many consumers. But obviously smaller brands can't necessarily do that. And that's why we see many actually skirt into the grey areas of direct-to-consumer and move into things like Amazon Marketplace so that they can achieve that. But if you're going pure D2C, you're not going to be able to deliver unless you're delivering next door to someone same day or next day. So actually, again, if you're not meeting the modern expectations of price and convenience as a D2C brand, you've got to offer something really innovative or unique or create that more personal connection with that shopper to get past that potential downfall.
Yeah, I think that's interesting in terms of price and how that's tied to value, as you say. One campaign that I really like is Beauty Pie has recently done a campaign which uses the tagline "Overpaying is officially over." So that is very price focused. But as we explore that idea of kind of value, and consumers are obviously feeling the pinch in terms of their finances, do we think we're going to see more of that kind of messaging going forward, really focusing in on the value that these brands can offer, whether that be through price or whether that be through other factors like quality, and or maybe even touching on things like sustainability as an added layer of value?
Yeah, they definitely should. That's moving forward. It's a big area of opportunity as consumers are looking to make the most of their dollars. And as you mentioned, sustainability is a huge area of opportunity for DTC brands. And there are quite a few that pride themselves on offering a sustainable product. Allbirds comes to mind to me specifically. They've really built a brand around creating an environmentally friendly shoe and also trying to change a category that's often environmentally, not so friendly. So they've done a lot of really interesting things, such as making their formulas open source. They've partnered with traditional brands such as Adidas to really push the idea of sustainability into the category as a whole, rather than, just kind of keep it to themselves. They're trying to make an impact for the long term.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Katie. I think we know that over the next decade, the sort of rise of conscious consumerism, consumers will be looking to move themselves to better habits in all those areas. And there is a perception that direct-to-consumer is more environmentally friendly. Just under half of UK consumers think it's better for the environment to buy directly from brands than from retailers. Whether that's true or not is, a matter of debate for another podcast. But the reality is that perception is growing. So D2C brands can trade off that. I think another thing, particularly in the income squeeze, obviously price has to be correct and, you have to be as competitive as possible. But many of those startup brands are just that. They are smaller SMEs or independent businesses. So actually they can trade on that as well. We have seen in past recessions in the UK that actually support for independence, support for small business goes up during that period, because the perception is that bigger businesses are able to weather the storm financially than smaller businesses. So actually those startups or those D2C brands can actually, talk to consumers in that way. So, find a common relationship in terms of, the tough times we're going through. Now, whether that translates into purchasing is a whole different beast, but there is an element within that consumers will be more willing to spend a couple of percent more with an independent brand that they may be more willing to do than from a mass market brand.
So again, as we're looking forwards and the kind of thinking about the outlook for direct-to-consumer or the direct-to-consumer model, from your perspectives, how easy, we've touched on it a little bit in a few different places, but how easy is it to start a direct-to-consumer business, and how easy is it to maintain and have success, I guess?
It's easy to start, but the challenge is growing and, staying ahead of the competition. There's so many new entrants into the market that brands, need to find ways to differentiate themselves through all the noise and give consumers a reason to keep coming back.
Yeah, I think, as Katie said, it's very easy to start a business. The sort of access to consumers or to potential consumers that online or the internet or on social media platforms give is unprecedented. So it's very quickly, you're very able to quickly find an audience if you have a good idea. But it is the harder part is maturing that business. I think that's why so many successful D2C brands over the past couple of years have had some form of subscription baked into their offering, be it, the likes of HelloFresh, pure subscription, or Peloton, obviously sells you a product, but also sells you a subscription alongside that. Because once you've got, that early interest, eking that interest out over a subscription period can give the business an element of stability as it looks to grow. I think the big issue in the D2C market at the moment is because there's so much interest from it, from a media or a industry perspective, it is the hot ticket, as it were, is that a lot of these brands come in and shine really brightly and then can't necessarily match expectations. So if we look at what Peloton's currently going through, it has more than doubled its sales over the past couple of years, helped by the pandemic, etc. But it has naturally had to lower expectations as we move into a period where people might not be exercising in home as much, and there may be a more difficult growth. But it is still a $4 billion business. But the reality is, the investors that came into that business thought it would be a $25 billion business by next year. So it's trying to judge in those expectations within that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to caveat it's very easy to start a business, because I'm sure there's lots of people listening who are probably starting a business and not necessarily finding it the easiest process, but it's easier than it's ever been before. I feel like that's the argument, right?
That is the argument. And, all the, whether you're a D2C brand or whether you're any other kind of brand, the simple mantra is if you've got a good product at the right price in the right place, you're, on the first foot on the road to success. But I think having it in the right place is the area we're talking about it being easier now. The access to consumers has been eased. So no, please don't inundate us with calls that it's hard to start business. We're aware.
So, final question, and this is quite a big one and quite a broad one. What do you both think are the biggest opportunities when we think about direct-to-consumer or the direct-to-consumer model at the minute?
I think, the biggest opportunity I see for the direct-to-consumer market is leaning into that personalization. That is really what the DTC model can offer consumers that a more traditional brand can't. Consumers want that elevated experience. They want it to be tailored to them, and they want that opportunity to customize products to fit their specific needs. We're seeing over half of consumers, find that DTC's brands offer those more unique products. And so it's just really an opportunity for DTC brands to capitalize on, that more one-on-one engagement can help drive loyalty and cut through some of the noise in the market.
I think that's slightly stolen my answer there. So I'm going to take a more controversial one. I think one of the biggest opportunity for D2C brands is to mature into a wider reaching brand. And I say that because what DTC has done, or the sort of access to consumers that, is driving current growth in D2C, is allowed startups to get proof of concept of their idea and, make it unavoidable for retailers and for those middlemen, as you put it at the start of this call, to be aware of those brands and to potentially be listed. Because the reality is, even in the UK, which has a highly developed online market, 7 in every £10 spent in UK retail is still spent in stores. So the access to consumers that retailers give is still really powerful. So for most brands in there, the goal is still to list with a retailer, but now they can have that proof of concept, and they can also be that expert in that area. In the UK, Tesco, so UK's biggest retailer, was looking to break into the sexual wellness market as interest in that area has grown. And rather than, say, developing its own line of toys, or this is a family friendly podcast, but own line of those types of products, it looked to Love Honey, a D2C brand that has steadily built over the last 15 years a real core and market leadership in that area. And therefore DTC has given it its platform to now partner with one of the largest brands, or largest retailers in the UK. So I would see D2C as a huge opportunity as a startup to evolve and move into new directions.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Sadly, that is all we've got time for today. I'm going to attempt to do a very quick summary. And although I've said it was my last question, I might loop you back in to confirm or disagree with my very brief summary of what we've talked about today. So to round up, essentially, direct-to-consumer, or the direct-to-consumer model, is a really powerful way to engage consumers and drive loyalty. And as we mentioned before, it's easier than ever before to start this kind of business because of the ability to go direct-to-consumer in a more accessible way via online channels. But actually, what's difficult is scaling it, and that's where meeting the consumer where they are, whether that be in terms of marketing messages or where they are shopping, is going to become more and more important. And then actually fundamentally the success drivers of these businesses essentially just mirror the wider market, in that it's going to be so important to have those fundamentals, like a good product at the right price, in the right place, with the right messaging surrounding it. So that is my very quick takeaway from today. Anything else to add or disagree with?
Sounds good to me. Yeah.
Perfect. So on that note, I want to say thank you for joining us. Thank you to Nick and Katie for talking to me about this today. If you want to know more about Mintel, who we are and what we do, head over to mintel.com and follow us on social media. We're on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter and Facebook. And check out our blog for even more insights from our analysts. And additionally, this podcast is timing quite nicely with the publication of a direct-to-consumer report in both the UK and the US. So if you're a Mintel subscriber, please do keep an eye out for those reports to get even more insights around this topic and learn even more from our analysts. So thank you again for listening. Please make sure you subscribe, rate and review this podcast. And if you like what you've heard, please do spread the word and look out for our next episode of Mintel's Little Conversation.